News is learning more now about U.S. Senate candidate and Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks and the tax cuts she received improperly on a home she owned in D.C.
Yeah, Alsobrooks says that she's paying that money back to the district, but adds she wasn't aware of the issue until recently. I-Team investigator Scott Taylor has several questions for Alsobrooks because D.C. records appear to show a different story. Scott, what'd you find?
Well, Alsobrooks got the D.C. home from her mom in 2003, but says she never received any tax bills. We did some digging, and the property was in her name for almost 15 years, and she took out 4 mortgages on the home until she sold it in 2018. Listen to U.S. Senate candidate and Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks explain on Monday why she improperly benefited from tax credits on a D.C. home she owned from 2003 to 2018.
I would never take a tax credit that I wasn't entitled to.
It was just revealed Alsobrooks owned a home in D.C. for close to 15 years, which had a homestead exemption tax credit on it, which gave her a tax cut even though she didn't qualify for it because she was never the property's primary resident. She saved nearly $14,000 in taxes on the property.
There's a house in D.C. that my grandmother lived in, and when she needed to move out of the house, I took over the house, started paying the mortgage, paid it until I sold the house.
The I-Team did some digging and discovered Alsobrooks became the owner of the home in November 2003 after her mom deeded it over to Alsobrooks for $0. 7 months later, in June, her grandmother paid off what appears to be Grandma's final loan on the home. A month earlier in May, Alsobrooks took out a $130,000 loan on her D.C. house in her name. It was the first of 4 mortgages Alsobrooks took out on the property, each one increasing in 2005, 2006, and 2016. She paid off all the loans, but each year her property was getting a tax break she didn't qualify for. Alsobrooks said on Monday she didn't receive any tax bills. That's odd because all 4 mortgages were in her name on the D.C. property, and her name has been on the deed recorded with the district for more than a decade.
The bills weren't sent to me. They were actually sent to my grandmother. I was paying through the mortgage company, but the bills in D.C. weren't sent to me. They were in someone else's name, so I didn't know because they weren't sent to me.
We have reached out to her office and campaign with a lot of questions, but so far, no response. She says the tax bill is now being corrected and it was an oversight. Now, keep in mind, she was the state's attorney in Prince George's County for 2 terms while she owned the house in D.C. Plus, she was also the county's executive director of the Revenue Authority for the county for 6 years while she owned that D.C. home. The Revenue Authority, by the way, serves as a real estate development agency for the county. For the I-Team, Scott Taylor, 7 News.
You may have seen the campaign ads about Maryland U.S. Senate candidate Angela Alsobrooks owing back taxes on a house she owned in the district. Well, 7 News was the first to obtain her property tax records and discovered that she owes $18,000 in back taxes.
Investigator Scott Taylor continues to break new ground on this story and joins us now on the final bill. So Alsobrooks needs to pay it off, and if she's getting any breaks from the district.
Yeah, that's right. She got a break on her property taxes for 13 years, a homestead exemption, and a senior disabled deduction. In total, with back taxes, penalties, and interest, it works out to tens of thousands of dollars, and she's now getting a deal. No penalties and a 25% reduction in interest. The 7 News I-Team learned last week that U.S. Senate candidate Angela Alsobrooks owes more than $18,000 in unpaid property tax for a home she used to own in the district. We got that number from the property tax bills 7 News obtained. The $18,000 is from 2 tax exemptions she didn't qualify for because she never lived at the house, a homestead exemption and a senior disability exemption. Those 2 exemptions were on the property when her grandparents owned it. They deeded it over to Alsobrooks' mother, who gave it to Alsobrooks in 2003. The exemptions remained on the property until Alsobrooks sold it in 2018. We just obtained Alsobrooks' final bill, more than $47,000. How did the tax office get to that amount? It said she made an error in 2003 and agreed to Alsobrooks' request to waive a 10% penalty, which is outlined in D.C. Code, and forgave 25% of accrued interest on her bill. 7 News asked Larry Gray, a certified public accountant and a member of the National Association of Taxpayers, if tossing out a penalty is normal.
If I'm representing somebody, I come in and say, hey, we're going to pay this in full. The first thing they throw out is generally the penalty. That's very normal to do.
The district gave multiple reasons for giving Alsobrooks 2 breaks on her unpaid taxes. D.C.'s tax office says in light of the considerable time that has passed since the error was made, and at the request of Ms. Alsobrooks, we abated the penalty and 25% of the accrued interest. Gray says the key to any reduction in unpaid property tax is making a deal.
But I think the big thing about it, we're not involved in that conversation. And if I was doing this representation, I might have been sitting there asking for a 50 or a 75% discount, and maybe it was a negotiate. That's the part we don't know.
Well, we believe Alsobrooks has until the end of the month to pay back the $47,000, maybe a payment plan after that. We reached out to her campaign today. So far, no response. For the I-Team, Scott Taylor, 7 News.
7 News has a lot of unanswered questions for Maryland U.S. Senate candidate Angela Alsobrooks about her former D.C. property. Our investigations discovered she owes $47,000 in unpaid property taxes, which she says she will be paying back. Now the I-Team is finding details that call into question if Alsobrooks followed the rules when renting out her grandparents' former home. Investigator Scott Taylor is joining us now tonight with more on that. Scott, what'd you find out?
This is Alsobrooks' former D.C. home. Alsobrooks rented out the house until she sold it in 2018. The issue? D.C. records reveal for 10 of those years she didn't have a license to rent out the property. This is what U.S. candidate Angela Alsobrooks' former home in Northeast D.C. looks like now. She was deeded her grandparents' home from her mother in 2003. Alsobrooks' campaign told 7 News in September that she rented out the house until selling it in January 2018. The house was posted for sale a month earlier on Redfin. Look inside, not move-in ready. The carpet ripped up, missing wood flooring and stains on the walls and carpet. D.C. Code requires landlords to provide safe and livable dwellings and make all repairs. Rentals must be clean and the floors must be in good repair. So, who rented the U.S. Senate candidate's home for 15 years? We found only 4 names that used Alsobrooks' home address on voter registration cards, according to D.C.'s Board of Elections. Her grandma, who last voted in 2002, and the new owner, plus 2 other names. Jesselyn White registered to vote using Alsobrooks' home address in July of 2003. Remember that date. It's important. It was 4 months before Alsobrooks was deeded the property from her mom. White told 7 News she lived at Alsobrooks' home with her aunt, Darlene McLean. Online records confirm McLean lived at the address from 2003 to 2004. White last used her voter's registration card with the same address in October 2017, 3 months before Alsobrooks sold the house. The second person, Nathaniel Fitzpatrick, used Alsobrooks' property address for his home address when he registered to vote on October 9th, 2012. Again, an important date. He also voted on November 6, 2012, using the same address. We found his dad, Tim Fitzpatrick, showing off what he calls his Whip 2 vehicle outside of Alsobrooks' home in August 2014 on Facebook. Online records show Tim Fitzpatrick started living at Alsobrooks' property in 2005. Remember the 2 important dates? July 17th, 2003, Jesselyn White's voter registration, and October 9th, 2012, Nathaniel Fitzpatrick's voter's registration. Both used Alsobrooks' property address with the D.C. Board of Elections. The problem? The district has no record of Alsobrooks renting out her property from 2003 to 2012. If you're renting in D.C., the property owner is required to be properly licensed by the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. District records show no rental license called a basic business license, or BBL, in Alsobrooks' name from 2003 to 2012, when it appears people were living at the house. A BBL is required to rent out a property in Washington, D.C. D.C. records confirm Alsobrooks never had a rental license for 10 of the 15 years she claims she rented out her home. She did have a valid BBL to rent the property from November 2013 to October 2015 and from August 2016 to July 2018. In D.C., the consequence for running without a valid BBL is a Class 1 or Class 2 infraction. You can be fined $2,000 for a first offense, and it can rise up to $16,000. A judge can also order a landlord to return all rent to a tenant at triple the amount paid. Last week, 7 News asked the Alsobrooks campaign 8 detailed questions about her 15 years as a landlord. We requested copies of her rental agreements with tenants, her D.C. rental licenses, and housing inspections, and if rental payments were paid to her in cash. So far, her campaign hasn't responded. Over the years, Angela Alsobrooks has never accepted my request for an on-camera interview. I asked again for this investigation, and she still hasn't agreed to talk to me. For the I-Team, Scott Taylor, 7 News.
Maryland U.S. Senate candidate Angela Alsobrooks is responding to our exclusive I-Team investigation that revealed Alsobrooks for years rented out her D.C. home without a required rental license. Investigator Scott Taylor brought all of this to light on Thursday. He's now back with Alsobrooks' response to your investigation.
That's right, Scott. This is her former home. Alsobrooks won't talk to me on camera, but she did speak to a reporter from our sister station in Baltimore. Please listen carefully to what Alsobrooks said in a brief interview. She doesn't deny what we reported. She does say she had a rental license. Alsobrooks leaves out any details on why D.C. records show otherwise. In fact, district records confirm that 10 out of the 15 years she was a landlord, the district doesn't have any record Alsobrooks had a license to rent out her property.
I wanted to ask about one of my colleagues in DC's reporting regarding the fact that you didn't have a rental license for the property in DC while you were renting it out. Can you explain that?
And you know, again, this is all Larry Hogan and these billionaires who are becoming more desperate by the day. And it's just a new attack every day. And they're becoming very desperate because, again, if he can't win on policy, if he explained what he intended to do as a senator, he knows that the people wouldn't vote for him. And instead, he's decided to spend his time trying to assassinate my character. I'm going to continue talking to Marylanders about the things that matter to them, about fighting for our reproductive freedoms in this moment where people are concerned about economic opportunity and providing at their kitchen tables. I'm going to be talking about cutting taxes for the middle class and working to have legislation that would outlaw these assault weapons that are killing our children, that are the #1 killer of children.
But did you have a license to operate the rental property?
I did.
Our investigation on Thursday reported Alsobrooks had a rental license from 2013 to 2018, but D.C. records again show before that she didn't have one. For the I-Team, Scott Taylor, 7 News.
And U.S. Senator-elect Angela Alsobrooks is taking care of a D.C. property tax bill that made some national headlines during her run for office.
Yeah, she was on the hook for more than $49,000 after she says she was unaware of 2 tax deductions she didn't qualify for on a house that she owned in the district. Scott Taylor broke the news of her final payment earlier today on social media and joins us live now. Scott?
If you've been following my investigations, you know Alsobrooks made her first payment of $17,000 on October 10th to cut into her total bill. She didn't meet the October 31st deadline to pay it all off, so it left a balance and growing interest. She just paid a final payment on November 27th for just over $29,000. She ends up paying over $47,000 after receiving tax breaks on her home for 13 years that she didn't qualify for. Remember, she said she wasn't aware that was actually going on. Her total bill did include another break from the district, though. It waived a 10% penalty and gave Alsobrooks a 25% break on her total interest over a decade. For the I-Team, Scott Taylor, 7 News.